Yeah, so it looks like it's working this time. Are we good? Yeah, so it looks like it's working this time. All right. Looks like we're live. One of these days, I'm going to get used to all this technology stuff, but not anytime soon. I'm really excited to have Cameron Jack with me out of the University of Florida. You're a researcher down there and a beekeeper as well. I guess tell me a little bit about yourself, Cameron. What are you into? What got you into beekeeping and got you into doing research and all that stuff?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Cayman. I appreciate it. And so I like to tell people I did bees before it was cool. I grew up around honeybees and beekeeping. My grandpa was a beekeeper. He was a high school principal, but he was also a sideliner. He managed about 150 to 200 colonies. And when I was a kid, it was kind of like embarrassing. It's not like something I was proud of. I didn't go around telling my friends that we kept bees because it was like the weird thing to do. Um, but it was I honestly, it was one of those things where it was a fun thing to do with my grandpa, and like the grandkids really liked it. Sometimes beekeeping skips a generation. None of my mom or any of my uncles, aunts, like nobody else picked it up, but like all the grandkids like really kind of enjoyed it. And so I've got some cousins that are still doing it. And
Cool.
and anyway, so I kind of just was around beekeeping as a kid, and when I went into my undergrad is when I kind of got back into it and decided to look for opportunities where I could research. I knew I wanted to do research, and I knew I liked teaching, and so I just started looking for opportunities to kind of merge all of these things together, and got really lucky and landed a dream job.
Yeah, I would say if you were wanting to do research on beekeeping and in the United States, Florida would be one of the better places to land. I would say, and
Definitely.
I definitely have a lot of friends who respect a lot of the work that you and Jamie Ellis and I'm sure there's other people involved down there. You two seem to be the featured guys. I guess I couldn't find anybody else to get on the billing, but
Well, Amy Vu, for those, I mean, some of the people watching might know of Amy. She's fantastic. She's our extension coordinator. So she's not particularly like a researcher, but she is really like the force that gets out all of our information, which is super important. I mean,
oh yeah.
if you do science in a vacuum and nobody sees it, I mean, what's the point, right? Like science is for the public. It's for the benefit of people. And so if nobody sees it, then it doesn't happen. So without Amy, we're kind of lost. we're just doing a bunch of work for no reason.
You got to have the advertising because it's kind of, if you don't, it's kind of like winking at a girl in the dark. You know what you're doing, but nobody else does.
Nobody else if nobody's picking it up, then
That's right. Well, I'll have to remember that. And, I've actually, before we get too far along into this, for those who are watching the video, pinned in the top comment and in the description, I'm going to have a lot of links from the University of Florida and from Cameron here. And he's got several articles that he sent me. And so you can look at those and see the research that they've done and go through. It's a lot of really fascinating stuff. So, of course, you'll have access to this video, but then you'll have access to all those papers that he has supplied, and I'm really looking forward to that. Also, I'm going to leave at the top of that comment and in the description a donate button for the University of Florida, because they, like everybody else, have needs to be able to do their research. And if you feel compelled to support the research they're doing for honeybees, then you can go to that donation link and do that. And thanks to, I like to say thanks to Steve Chubb and to Brian Reese, especially, who make videos like this possible. There's been several people involved over the years who have supported us, but, people sometimes get a little upset when we talk about donations and money, but that is actually what drives these videos. And we are going to be getting into some amazing talks on oxalic acid. So I'm excited. And this guy's got a great name. It's almost exceptional, like Cayman. It's not quite. Um, but
Almost.
Cameron, I keep calling you Jack Cameron. That's what I keep getting all the time.
It's been with me my entire life. Every teacher I've ever had since I was in kindergarten has called me Jack Cameron, and that's just what I get for having two first names.
Yeah, well, basically, I get called Cameron more than I get called Cayman, actually. So it's all good. It's interesting how we're both into bees, though, and so with that all said, everyone knows that down there at the University of Florida, you like killing mites down there, or at least raising mites, if it doesn't kill them with the research. And oxalic acid. Oh, well, a little bit of both. Oxalic acid is, all things considered, a new treatment on the market still, compared to several other treatments, and we're still learning a lot about it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, is because there's a lot of information out there that's partially true, that's true, that's not being spread around. There's a lot of falsities that are being spread around through groups. We kind of want to iron those out a little bit so we can get on the same page. We can kill the mites better, and also see where things are going, because I think oxalic acid has a lot of potential, and we'll talk about that more towards the end. But let me ask you some questions right now, because this is one of the questions I get asked the most. What is the legal dose right now for oxalic acid vapor on colonies?
Yeah, good question. So the legal dose. So um, it's very simple. I mean, the legal dose of one or of oxalic acid is just 1 gram. I mean, that's it. And that's, just to be very frank, it's too little. I mean, that's not enough. We've done multiple experiments where we've always keep the 1 gram in there to kind of show time after time that it just doesn't do anything. And it's not very effective. But right now, according to the label, that's what it is. And I could give, just a little bit of a history on this. When I first started doing some oxalic acid work, it was part of my PhD research with Jamie Ellis a few years ago. And there was a paper that came out in 2015 from some researchers in the UK, and they showed that 2.25 grams was like the minimal effective dose for oxalic acid vapor. And then I was looking at it, I'm like, well, then why are we stuck at 1 gram? And I've tried hard to find the answer to that. Like, where did the EPA come up with 1 gram? And the best I can tell, and I've even emailed that question off and haven't gotten an answer. It seems like nobody knows where the 1 gram came from. But the best I can tell is I found a paper from the 1980s that came out of Europe, and they said that 1 gram was effective at killing mites. However, it wasn't even done in a Langstroth hive. It was done in a smaller hive, and so a smaller hive, 1 gram could be enough, but it's not in just a regular deep in the Langstroth.
Wow. So what would be?
Anyways, that's the story. That's as best I can come up with as an explanation as to why the legal limit is just 1 gram.
So yay. But that sounds like it's going to be changing possibly in the future. Hopefully. If you had, now this is putting you on the spot a little bit here, but with the research that you all have done, is there a general idea of where you think it would be better to be right now? Because if you could do what you wanted to do and say, hey, we're going to change the legal dosage to what you researchers think would be best, what would be that number? Do you guys have an idea?
Well, I have my idea. If I was Emperor Cameron, which would probably not be a pretty sight, it would be 4 grams probably. We've done
a
few
that's a lot.
experiments. I mean, it's quadrupling the legal limit, that's going to come with a price. I mean, I'm not advocating for that right now, because there needs to be some more research. We need to know. But we've done multiple studies. We haven't seen lasting effects really on the colony. They come out stronger even after multiple treatments of 4 grams. I think, and I'm hopeful that we will get there. To be honest, Cayman, I think it's more likely that the EPA and USDA, once that label is changed, I'm gonna guess that it's gonna take a baby step to 2 grams, which is better. But I mean, I still think it's maybe not enough. Um, but that's likely, I would say, going to happen because the legal limit in Europe is 2 grams. So there's lots of data to show that like that is 2 grams is safe, right?
Safe,
Like, I
right,
mean, in the
right.
United States, there's not necessarily a lot of data because we haven't been using oxalic acid as long as they have been in Europe. And so that their limit is 2 grams. And so I think that's probably what's going to happen first, probably before we could snap our fingers and jump to 4.
Yeah,
But I'm
it's
hopeful that that might happen because I think it's more effective.
well, I hope so, and it's just it's so frustrating. My experience with it, of course, I remember before it was legal, and there was beekeepers like, man, they're doing it in Europe, they're doing these other places. We need to be able to do this, and thankfully,
Mhm.
it eventually became label, but then so much lack of experience and a lot of lack of communication between the people that did know and the folks that didn't. And by the time the rumor mill goes around from bee club to bee club, Facebook group to Facebook group, there's people that say, no, you have to do it once a month, every month of the year. No, once a week for 3 weeks. Oh, now it's 4 times in 21 days, 5 times in 21 days,
Yeah.
all these different things. And I remember I trusted it one time. It was going to be 5 rounds in 21 days, which people were telling me at the time, whoa, that is a lot of treatments there. You're crazy, Cayman. That's totally unnecessary.
Mhm.
But instead of listening to those people, I did an alcohol wash with 40 colonies beforehand, 5 rounds in 21 days later, and then came back and did an alcohol wash afterwards. And I was shocked. I didn't even get close to 70%. I was in the low 60s on the best. I did very rough. I didn't actually get a mathematician and get the statistics and all that stuff figured out, but I could tell I wasn't getting anywhere close to the 90% I was told I was going to get with those 5 rounds in 21 days. So this is what a lot of beekeepers on my end, you hear things, bee clubs, Facebook. That's why I wanted to have you on so we could kind of get a little bit more clarity and get hopefully thousands of beekeepers to understand better how to use this product and understand its limitations. So one, we don't make mistakes and trust it in areas that we shouldn't, so we don't lose bees over it. But also realize, because there are some beekeepers that get on internet groups and bash you for like, oh my goodness, you treat your bees 2 times in winter. That's overkill. You're going to damage your winter bees. What do you have to say about that? Because I remember when I first started recommending to do 2 oxalic acid vapor rounds in December when we're broodless, and beekeepers saying you're going to damage your cluster of bees because the crystals can maybe possibly damage the queen or something. What's your thoughts on this? Does that adversely affect the bees at all, in your opinion, on that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, you know, there's things that you can do in a lab, and then there's things that you do in the field that, if I'm in a lab and I put oxalic acid on my bees, like directly, and put them on the queen, and then I'm looking for like all these different effects, you'll probably see it, right? Like, I mean, you're putting on a pretty harsh chemical onto some bees, and so like no doubt, like there's going to be some effects. What you got to do is you have to think of it as a colony. I mean, that's what it is, like the super organism. So just because you're affecting some cells doesn't necessarily mean it's not overall good for the colony. And in my opinion, I think I mean, we're at the point of desperation where we have to do things that maybe we wouldn't normally have done before. So, regarding your point of treating multiple times in the winter, yeah, I do. And I think you it's overall, I mean, you want to make sure you're cleaning up your bees, especially when you've got that broodless period. It's a little bit all hands on deck. Like, you want to make sure you're knocking down those mites to keep your bees running strong. Now, obviously, can you overtreat them? Yeah, probably. That's actually a point of research that I still think needs to happen with oxalic acid vapor specifically. We've gone up to 4 grams in some various projects that we've done, and we've in different times of the year, and we've seen our bees come out really looking good and doing well. 4 grams sounds like a lot. So people sometimes ask me, well, Cameron, what? So if I have double deeps, because that should I be doing 8 grams? And like the question is, or the answer is like, I don't really know. I don't know. We haven't like, I think that's actually some important research that needs to
Yeah.
happen. And I love my bees too. And I don't want anybody to get me wrong, but I think that's an important part of like this research question is finding out how much is too much. And I think we haven't, people are going to have different opinions. And so I'm
Yeah.
sure there's people cursing me right now, but I don't think we've found it yet.
Well, there's, if my opinion and my experience with YouTube and doing a conference or anything, I'm sure you know this, if you're not getting any backlash, you're not attempting to do anything. So you've got to, you got to deal with the negativity and push forward. But we've got to know the limitations, because right now there's way too many question marks on oxalic acid, and what's being allowed to circulate through the groups is largely inaccurate, and people are losing colonies because they think that they're getting the good information, and then they feel like I'm doing right by my bees because this guy says 1 round every week for 3 weeks is enough to control them, and 1 round a week isn't enough to hardly scratch the surface if there's brood in the colony. Now, if they're broodless and you did 3 rounds with complete broodlessness, you probably could get a halfway decent bit of control. What's your, well, before we jump into that one, because I've got that question down here too. We're in a tight spot. You and I talked about this. We don't have a lot of treatment options, and there's concerns with certain products, Apivar being one of them. More and more people are reporting issues with Apivar doing what it used to do for them. I don't know 100% where we're at with that. I'm not sure maybe anybody knows the answer to that yet. I know some research is being done, but we're constantly in a state of flux of what may have worked 2 years ago for us may not work now. And we don't know a ton about oxalic acid yet. Formic is really hard to manage in southern states like where you're at in Florida. Here in Tennessee, it can be difficult to fit in. And then, we have Apigard and a couple other products, and some of the products, and I'm not going to name names, just stink. They're not really good at controlling mites. I mean, and it's hard to get new products out onto the market. So beekeepers are kind of in a tight spot, and we only have a few options to work with, and none of them, in my opinion, are extremely good options. We have some okay options, and we've got to manage to work with what we have. And in order to do that, we must understand as much as possible, what it can and cannot do. So in regards to that, we know the legal dose is right now 1 gram per box. Is it legal to use oxalic acid vapor with honey supers on right now, or where are we at with that?
Yeah, it's kind of this is going to be a hot button issue, and no matter what I say, some people are going to get mad. But so here's the best that I can do with this is, the research, or we'll start here. The FDA, the Food Drug Administration, they're not going to look for oxalic acid. So basically, they're saying we're done. Like, this is not. We're recognizing this is not a major issue. We're not going to look for it. The apibioxal label to this point, it hasn't changed. They haven't specifically said they're in the process of amending this to change it to being legal to have your honey supers on when you treat. So this process is happening. It has not happened yet. So this is where, I kind of have to leave it kind of up to the beekeepers to do what your conscience tells you. I mean, legally, right? Like if you're going to follow the rules completely, legally, no, you cannot do it right now. The change is happening. So is anybody going to enforce it? No. So that's where I can kind of leave it to you right now. There's,
Sure.
Honestly, there's it's nice to have some treatments. There's only a few where you're allowed to have your honey supers on while you treat and provide something. So I get that. You know, I think that's important. If you're targeting a specific nectar flow and you have a good bead on your mite numbers and what's working for you and what's not working, I think you can get around it. Like even if this never did become a legal treatment with honey supers on, you know, I never treat with honey supers on. I'm not a commercial beekeeper. We have like 200 colonies that we have for research. And then I have my own personal hives, but I'm nowhere near that. So I get it. I mean, I get that people need that, but for a vast majority of people watching probably are not commercial beekeepers. I'm telling you, if you have a good sense of where your mite numbers are, you can probably plan it out and not need to do it anyways. But
Right. Going along with that,
yeah,
though, how effective, that kind of leads into our next question. How, if you could, let's say it was legal right now, and you could treat oxalic acid vapor on colonies with 4 medium honey supers, and they're a double deep brood. So you have 2 deep boxes of brood roughly in stores, and you have 4 mediums on top of that. And it's obviously a big colony. We're looking at late May, June, early May, whatever it is, whenever your honey flow is, there's massive amounts of bees. If it's a good honey colony, we're talking 50, 60,000 bees probably. And how effective is OAV with 1 gram going to be on a colony with just frames of brood? The mites are in that under the cappings, and oxalic acid vapor, for those who don't know, does not penetrate through the wax and get to those mites in the brood. So how many mites are you going to kill in one shot with that much bees and brood in there? And then 2, how many times would you have to treat that just to get some control? It would be a phenomenal amount from what I understand.
it would be a phenomenal amount. That's exactly right. I mean, we've had just to shrink this back down into a single deep. You know, we've done OA applications, multiple applications at 1 gram, you know, once a week for 4 weeks, for 3 weeks. You know, we've done different experiments, and we hardly see, we can see like a slight decline in the numbers, but it's not enough to be considered an effective treatment at all. So I mean, if you had a big strong colony, I mean, it's just not going to do a darn thing, really.
So yay, we might have that legal soon, and woo, that's going to really help us out. Not really.
Yeah,
Not, and so that's, I mean, it's great to have, I guess, it legal. So it's just one thing we don't have to worry about. But at the same time, what we need as beekeepers more than anything is something that we can kind of anchor down on as something that's going to really change things for us. The mites have just become more damaging as time has gone on. I mean, compared to the damage that they did 30 years ago, they are a lot tougher. I think it's more the viruses that they carry and maybe other things going on. I don't claim to understand all of that, but our bees cannot withstand the same thresholds that they could 30 years ago. Now it seems like whatever they're doing to our bees, it's hitting them hard. And so we just have to understand what works and what doesn't right now, so we can have colonies that come out of winter looking awesome. And it's not all gloom and doom. It
right.
just means you have to roll up your sleeves and get to work, and you just can't throw bees in a box like your great grandfather used to do.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. And it beekeeping takes work. You know, I always tease Jamie Ellis. We often do events together, and we like go to same groups. People invite us both out to speak, and they always ask Jamie, like, he's going to talk about the biology, and it's like fun, and he's like, yeah, bees are fun. And then like I'm always the pest and disease guy. I go right after
Oh
Jamie. I'm like, all
man.
right, now that Jamie got you all hyped up, let me tell you why all your bees are going to die. So I'm always kind of like the doom and gloom guy, unfortunately, but I try not to be. I mean, beekeeping is great, right? I mean, there's still plenty of reason to be happy. There are beekeepers that are successful, lots of them around the country that do really well. It just takes more work. And that's frustrating, and that's hard. And can be discouraging when your colonies are just seem to be doing poorly, even though you're trying your best. But but you can do it. I mean, I'm very hopeful that we'll find more effective ways to control mites. There are other problems. We've been talking about mites this whole time, but there's stress on queens, and there's
Mhm.
poor nutrition that can affect bees, and so there's lots of reasons that they've got problems, but mites seem to be the one that seems to be the easy. I don't want to say it's not easy to control, but like you can do something about mites. It just takes work and it costs a little bit of money, unfortunately.
Yeah, it can be done. And many people think, again, that they're actually accomplishing mite control. A lot of times it's partial mite control, excuse me, or they treat for what will work up in Illinois and they live in
Right.
Florida, and you
Mhm.
produce so many more mites in Florida. And so it doesn't work for you. So that's where alcohol wash is really focusing in and dialing your treatment protocol for your area really makes a difference. And that's if you do that and you kind of get a grip on things and you start seeing a lot of success. I'd like to say a big thank you to Jason Wester for donating to this live chat and making it possible and more. By the way, I will have Michael Palmer on 26th. Not that Cameron's not awesome or anything like that, but you
Michael
know,
Palmer is amazing. That's great. You should
my,
tune
my,
in for that.
Michael Palmer is pretty cool, and it'll be a lot like this too, where we're going to try to do something a little bit light and fun, but also get to the core of the matters. And I think things are going to change. I'm really encouraged, Cameron. On my end, I'm seeing a lot more beekeepers network, use technology, and and just communicate. And that's why I wanted to reach out to you, and I'm trying to reach out more and more to the research community, because I think there needs to be a good connection and a good relationship between all beekeepers and the researchers, and we need to work together to solve these issues.
Yeah.
Because if we're all kind of realize that the problem exists, and we're all trying to focus a little bit more in the same direction, then that energy is more powerful. And I'm hoping that we can do that and make it better for ourselves. Everybody would benefit from that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, I couldn't say that any better. I mean, I think that's actually the most important thing that we could do. In other industries, I've seen them, the like, for instance, like, I'm in Florida. Citrus is huge, or it was huge in Florida, right? Because but citrus greening became such a terrible problem that you saw I witnessed, the industry, the growers really connecting with the researchers, and they had great relationships and they worked together, and they've made some great progress. There's plenty of reasons on both sides, for sometimes researchers don't understand the beekeepers' needs, and then sometimes beekeepers get really frustrated because they maybe don't understand why the researchers are doing certain things, or yeah. So you're right, there just has to be that open door of communication, so we can understand each other and help each other. And I'll say, many researchers are also beekeepers. We also do this. We're not doing it full time like many commercial beekeepers, but we love our bees too, right? I never want to do anything that would harm my bees. But
You say that, but then earlier you were saying, well, we need to find out how far we can go with this oxalic acid
oh,
dosage.
that's true, Kay. I've got four little girls, four daughters, and I remember once I brought my girls into the lab when I was just cleaning up an experiment, and I had all these dead cups of bees out in the freezer, and I just pulled them out of the freezer, so they were all dead in cups, and my daughter was like, "Daddy, I thought you were trying to save the bees." I'm like, I am. Don't look over here. But so hopefully the bees understand on the other side when I get to talk to
So I
them.
got an interesting question, one that I didn't have. What, I know that maybe I didn't give you a chance to prep on this one at all, random question, but what does oxalic acid roughly break down into? This person is asking, does it get into the wax? Is it safe for our combs and our bees?
Yeah, good question. So one of the things, I'm not anti-chemical at all. Some people that are anti-chemical altogether. Some people say, well, I'm okay with chemicals as long as they're natural chemicals. They don't want to do synthetics. And so I understand that the difference, I guess, really between some natural chemicals and synthetic chemicals is synthetic chemicals tend to be, so that for honeybees, that's going to be like our apistan, our checkmite, apivar. Those are the active ingredients are all very lipophilic, which means they stay in wax. Now, most of the natural compounds are water soluble and they don't penetrate into wax. They don't stay in the wax at all. And so that's one thing that's also, a good thing, I guess, about using them, and we can kind of use them a little bit more regularly without seeing the same issues with like what's going on in the comb. So we don't see that it does break down pretty quick, and it doesn't really stick around. So that's like one benefit of oxalic acid. Now, typically, at least, before mites had resistance to some of the synthetic chemicals are very good at penetrating that insect cuticle because they are lipophilic, and insect cuticles are waxy, and so they're good at getting in there. They're good at disrupting specific central nervous system functions of the mite, and shutting them down. But then there's also side effects of them hanging around for a long time, and even in the environment they don't break down like I mean, they do eventually, but it takes a lot longer for them to break down than some of the natural chemicals will.
Well, like with oxalic acid, I drink some green smoothies and stuff for health related reasons, and there's a halfway decent amount of oxalic acid in a lot of the greens that I eat.
Yep.
Obviously, too much of anything's not good for you. So, too much oxalic acid in the human diet is bad, but a certain degree of it, if you eat a lot of greens, you're getting oxalic acid in your body. And from what I understand, oxalic acid breaks down into pretty basic compounds, as far as like CO2 is one of them or something like that. I don't know if that's correct. I've heard different things, but I do know with like apivar, it breaks down into amitraz, from what I understand, is not what actually builds up into the wax. It breaks down into other types of chemicals that goes way over my head, and then those build up in the wax.
Yep,
and
that's right.
And so, but again, it's tricky, because we only have a few natural products, and they are really weather dependent. And it seems like if they're really good at beating up the mite, they're also fairly close to beating up the bees. And there's just not a huge gap between crushing mites and damaging bees, except with like maybe oxalic acid vapor to a degree, but then it's a super soft treatment. And so, yeah, okay, you're not really, doesn't seem to be any noticeable effect on the bees, but we're not getting near the mite drop that we hope to get for that one treatment, which, it's a lot of labor. And, for, say 300 colonies, like we like to run over here. And sometimes, this year we had 450, most we've ever had. And, you treat those 5 rounds a piece,
That
and
becomes
that's
expensive and labor intensive.
oh yeah. Well, we're treating at hot times of the year, and we treat multiple times a year. So it's a complicated issue, but oxalic acid does break down into pretty natural compounds. And, there's oxalic acid in honey, albeit a very small amount.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you said this earlier. I mean, really all toxicology is finding, it's like finding that dose. The dose makes the poison, if you've ever heard that saying before. I mean, water can be toxic if you drink too much of it, right? You hear it, all those stories of people doing stupid games where they're drinking too much water and somebody dies. It can be toxic. It's so oxalic acid, as you said, it shows up in honey because I mean, it's in a lot of nectar of the plants, of different flowers, and it shows up in so many of the food that we eat. It's all about the dose. You concentrate that oxalic acid, and it can be pretty nasty, right? It's something that you wouldn't want to get on your skin. Now, we haven't said this yet, but when you're vaporizing, you got to protect yourself, right? You got to make sure you've got a real respirator on with organic vapor filters. You don't want to breathe this stuff in. You don't want it in your eyes. You don't want it on your skin. You do have to be careful.
Yeah.
About
So
that, it's all about that dose.
exactly. So this is one of the questions that a lot of people have been asking, and that's kind of leads right into it about getting it vapor form or on your skin. So have you and the University of Florida done any research on extended release oxalic acid, like in shop towels, Swedish pads, or anything like that? Are you looking to maybe look into that more into the future if you have? Because that is an issue right now, is what we have available isn't an extended period. Maybe right before you get into the pad, let me ask you this. When you treat with oxalic acid vapor, how long do you think that kills for? Does it kill for a day, 2 days, or just what is it literally touches in that moment of treatment?
Yeah, good question. So I'll tell you, I can't answer that specifically as in like a day or 2 day, but I can tell you in 72 hours. So here's what one of the dose experiments. So if people want to read about that study, you had already mentioned that you'd put that up. There's so for instance, in that study, what we did was we would treat, and then we would put we would put sticky boards down underneath on our bottom board, and we'd see the mite drop, and so within that first 72 hours you just see tons of mites. I mean, every time we'd apply it at different doses, but at especially that 4 gram treatment, we're seeing tons of mites that drop. And within the next 70, so we'd keep that in for the first 72 hours, and we'd replace it immediately, put another sticky board down for the next 72 hours. That mite drops would go way down. I mean, or like you wouldn't see any mites drop. And then the next time we'd apply, you'd see lots of mites. So if you look at like the figures in that table, or in that article, you'll see them do this, where they just go up, down, up, down, up, down. It's because every time we treat, we see lots of mites drop. Whenever we're not doing it, we don't see it. And so I can tell you, definitively that it's a 72-hour period. When you're vaporizing, at least within 72 hours, you're going to kill them. After 72 hours, you're not. It's a very fast acting treatment. So it doesn't hang around very long. And so to bring up your point, you asked about the extended release. We did.
If you don't mind, I'm just kind of, before you jump into that, because that will take us a second, I think.
Okay.
With that being said, on the 72 hours and seeing those mites fall for that period of time, that would mean, technically, if you cover that whole period and you needed to cover 21 days, and that would be 7 treatments in 21 days, should give you good mite control. But from what I've read and seen, it does not. As far as like if you did 7 treatments, 21 days apart, even though you're getting that big drop over 72 hours, basically what I'm saying is that doesn't mean you're killing 90% of the mites that are in that 3-day window. That just means that you're having a drop over 72 hours. So could it be that, this is all theoretical. Could it be, though, that what we're hitting is mostly in the first day, and then some of them die very quickly and some of them are dying over a 3-day period, but we're not actually, because literally during heavy brooding times of the year, all throughout the day, there's new brood emerging and new mites are being exposed. And over that 3-day period, there's a lot more mites. So basically what I'm getting at is, just because we see mite fall for 3 days does not mean that if we treat with oxalic acid once every 3 days, we are going to get sufficient control.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you're right. And so, I mean, that's another study that could be done, right? Is you treat once, and then every 24 hours you're putting in screens for the next few days. Like, let's see how what that curve looks like of drop off. Maybe it's instant. Maybe it only works maybe that one day, and you've killed some mites from that one moment, but then every day after that you've got more mites that are emerging out. So I can tell you, I don't know if we talked about this at all before, you and I, but we did just recently, just this winter, did a little experiment where we were looking, kind of trying to improve some of the timing of oxalic acid vaporization, where we would apply a treatment and we either applied it every like we did this at 4 grams again, because again I want to build some more data that shows that our 4 gram treatment was safe. So we treated every 3 days, or we treated every 3 days for 4 applications. We treated every 5 days for 4 applications. We treated every 7 days at 4 applications. And what we saw was actually whenever we treated every 3 days, the number of mites that we were killing was actually much lower than when we waited 5 days or 7 days. And I think that's just the number of mites, and our overall at the end of the day, our estimated infestation levels were higher with the 3 gram treatment. So basically we weren't killing as many mites, and it's probably because we could be killing them like a certain cohort every 3 days, and then you're killing you're treating regularly, but there's so many that are still in that brood just waiting to come out. And when we waited longer periods, like 5 days or 7 days, we saw it work more effectively, probably because it was just more time for those mites to come out after treatment, so we could get a heavier drop whenever we did treat. And I'll tell you, we had one of our groups, our 5-day groups, they ended up having quite a lot of mites, more so than we should have allowed, right? Like our averages were about like 10 mites per 100 bees, like, which is too much, way too much, right?
That's pretty high.
It's pretty high. So
about 30 mites in an alcohol wash, roughly.
yeah. So it was a lot. And so when we would, when we, after that treatment period of treating every 5 days, and we did 4 applications, we actually saved those bees, and they looked good. We got where we started at about 10 mites per 100 bees, like overall it was like an average. Then we ended up at less than 1%, 1 mite per 100 bees. So and they seemed to do okay. Now the question could be raised. I was in Maryland Beekeepers Association this last weekend, and I was speaking there, and a really great question came from a beekeeper. They're like, so Cameron, you showed that you kill a lot of mites. Does that mean that, you killed a lot of mites, but they probably still have really high virus loads, right? And that's a good point.
Yeah,
they could. So I'd be fully on board for encouraging beekeepers to don't allow your mites to get that high, because the damage could still be done, right? Having such high having such high virus loads, that could take some time, especially with our winter bees, when we're not turning those bees around quickly. Those viruses could still be present in the hive, and could still do some damage, even though the mites are gone. So
that's a great point. I had a colony that we let go treatment free because it was weird looking bees. They were really dark gray looking, which for our bees was really odd. We caught them in a swarm trap for a video, and I decided to let them go treatment free. We would just monitor kind of where we were at. And in their second season, they washed 94 mites in a alcohol wash of like 320 odd bees.
Yeah.
And massive amounts. Of course, they were dwindling. We treated them with 5 rounds in 21 days with oxalic acid vapor, and we still washed 36, I think, mites, 37 mites. So it actually reduced more mites than I thought it would. Keep in mind, though, at this point, they're not raising a lot of broods. They were mostly broodless because the viruses had really got into the bees. And we put 2 strips of Apivar after the oxalic acid, and that helped clean them up some more. And then after the strips were done, I requeened them, and then they went into winter, and I did oxalic acid when they were broodless, and they probably went into winter with 3 frames of bees. They came out of winter with like 2 frames, and they had a really hard time getting going. And it really wasn't worth the effort we put into it, to be honest. I love bees, and I was glad to see that they actually survived, though. And they came out of winter. Once they finally got that nectar going, finally the viruses cleaned up. It took about 2 queen changes, all that treatment. We didn't get honey for the first year because they were so weak. And I think that goes to show you, though, you can't let them get that high. Maybe you could save them. I was shocked they survived. And I want to say real quick to Vanderpool Farms LLC, thanks for donating. And he said, Cameron, come back to Oregon. So apparently you've been up to Oregon. And
I did. That's where I did my master's, and I love Oregon. So anytime you want to have me out, I'll be there.
Hey, guys need to have him up to Oregon. Apparently, uh, I probably shouldn't say this because it's going to be such a poor joke, but he could be an organ donor. No,
Maybe.
anyways, that's terrible. So that being said, I've been to Oregon once. Some gorgeous Douglas firs,
Oh,
massive trees.
I tell people that's God's country. That's amazing. I mean, you got the mountains, you got the sea, and it's so diverse. I love Oregon. I will say I don't want to offend any Florida beekeepers because I love being in Florida, but um, I grew up in the mountains and I grew up like camping and hiking, and people are like, you can do that in Florida. I'm like, you can go on a walk in Florida, but if there's no elevation change, what's the point? So I miss the mountain. I miss Oregon a lot.
And I want to say a big thank you to Mary A, who has donated as well. And thank you for saying great information, Mary A. We appreciate your support. And now finally getting back around to the oxalic acid extended release. So, of course, Randy Oliver is considered the guy that really pushes that the most, whether it's the Swedish cellulose type sponges or whether that's shop towels. There's a lot of people talking about that all the time, but it's complicated, just like everything else with treating mites. Do you guys down at the University of Florida tinker around with that? Have you done some research, and are you looking to do some research on that in the future?
Yeah, good question. So just I haven't really been talking about this research yet because we're still kind of going through a lot of the data and trying to clean it up, figure out what we have first. But I'll tell you a little bit. I mean, we've just completed a study that we've been doing for a long time, for over a year, where we took 8 different chemical treatments and we were applying them at every season. So we had hundreds of colonies in this experiment where we treated and we would watch the mite levels and we'd kind of watch how they would affect the mite levels to bring them down, and then they would come back up, and we kind of try to figure out what's going to be most effective with these treatments. And so one of them that we did was like an OA extended release in shop towels, and we used Randy's method but a lot of beekeepers have talked about it. So we kind of just wanted to see what we saw or what would happen, right? And I can tell you, we never really had great control with it. It's something that we did see, an effect where we might see a little dip, but then it would eventually come right back up, our mite numbers, and so maybe it would hold off on the mite growth for a period of time, but it never really did much for us. And I've heard some of the same from some researchers at Auburn University, Jeff Williams' lab. I know that Jennifer Berry down in Georgia had done some. I think actually I don't want to step on their toes because I believe they've done some new oxalic acid research, and they might have some new information that I don't know about yet.
It's all right. We fully believe in stepping on toes
okay,
in
good.
Tennessee, so no problems.
But just say, from us, we haven't seen it be very effective, and I haven't heard of a lot of beekeepers, at least I can say in the southeast part of the United States, that have had much luck with that. I think I'm interested in it, and I think there's a place for it, and there's potential for it, and I would love to see it. But as we already talked about with oxalic acid, the nature of the compound, it breaks down fairly quickly. And so, I mean, I get that the point is to try to keep it around longer as an extended release, but I think that's a tough sell, and it's going to be hard to do. So potential, sure. I don't think it's there yet.
I don't think so either. And yes, and that's one of the beauties of oxalic acid is it does break down pretty rapidly, and so you don't have long-term buildups in colonies I can't imagine. It's like, for example, in agriculture, if you study history, especially Israel and that region. Every time someone would conquer, they would salt the fields, or if they were getting pushed out, they would salt the fields before the enemy got there, so they'd have a hard time growing crops.
Mhm.
If oxalic acid built up in our colonies like that, we would have to replace all kinds of comb and stuff, because eventually the bees wouldn't be able to brood up with such high acid levels in the comb. So it's beautiful that it doesn't build up, but it does degrade quickly. And so, yeah, it's a big challenge. Which kind of leads me to another question. With what you guys are doing, I know that you guys experiment with a lot of things, extended release, and is there any other products that you guys are tinkering with that you can talk about, or is it just something you can say, well, we're trying some new things out, or you're hoping to? What's kind of the future that you're hoping for? Maybe some controls with what we
Sure.
have to work with, or maybe something new.
Yeah. This is a really important, we kind of harped on this whole conversation of, we're kind of at desperate times where we just don't have a lot of effective options to really even rotate. I mean, beekeepers probably genuinely want to rotate their treatments, but they're not getting, they don't have a lot of options that work well for them. Um, and so, I think that that's an important area of research, is to screen for new active ingredients. And that's something that we've been doing over the last year or so. Is we've been searching, trying to find some effective ingredients, and that we have done that. I mean, we are doing it. And I'm happy to say we've even had some hits. It's tricky work, because you're trying to kill an arthropod on another arthropod. So mites are arthropods, bees are arthropods. They're somewhat similar. I mean, they are very different, but they physiologically, they have a lot of similarities, and that's very different. Sometimes when I'm talking about this, I say, think of your dog, and if your dog has fleas, well, now you're comparing a mammal. You're trying to control an arthropod on a mammal, and they are very different. And so,
Mm-hmm.
something that's toxic for the arthropod might not be toxic at all for the mammals, and it's very safe. And so use those compounds away. Well, that it gets trickier with honeybees and mites, and so that research process is pretty slow. And one other thing that just makes doing this research difficult is the fact that we don't have an ability to rear mites in a lab, to like culture mites. If you think about like any other crop pest or insect pest, they can be reared in a laboratory in year-round research. Imagine what would happen if we had year-round access to varroa. People in Canada and in Minnesota, at these temperate climates where that really have to shut down. We could continue to do year-round research, and we could progress so much faster, and we don't have that. Mites are so difficult to kill when they're inside the hive, but they're so hard to keep alive when you pull them out of the hive. And so that kind of adds another level of difficulty. But getting back to your point of looking for actives, I mean, we active ingredients. We have done some of that, and we have had some good hits. It becomes, this is the challenging part, is like, okay, we found a chemical that has never been used on mites before, and guess what, it's really toxic to mites, it's not toxic to bees. Fantastic. Now what? Right? What do you do now? Well, of course there's going to be more work that has to be done before we could ever release this chemical into the environment. We need to know what's it going to do. I mean, we tested it on honeybee adults. What's it going to do to the larva? What's it going to do in the environment? Is it going to kill plants? Is it going to get in the soil? Is it going to break down? Like, there's so many questions that need to happen. But even still, we can do that research, but nothing is going to move the needle forward until you have a company pick it up and want to produce it, right? Like turn it into a chemical. And it's very
Yeah.
expensive for them to do that because of all the research that has to be done and all the hoops that need to they need to jump through. It could be years from the time that we find a chemical to the time that it is released. And I think that it's going to have to require some partnership between researchers, beekeepers, companies,
Yeah,
the EPA, the USDA, like we all kind of have to get on board and say we need something to happen fast. We're running out of time. We're running out of options, and it has to be, a company. They're not going to invest their own money into it unless they think they're going to get a return on investment, right? I mean,
sure.
that's capitalism. That's how it works. Um, and that kind of comes back to the question of, as beekeepers, are we using the legal treatment? Not sometimes, no, right? And what
Right.
incentive is there for a company to go through the trouble of coming up with new treatments if we're going to use off-label stuff? So um, that's this is where it all just kind of comes back to, like, we just kind of have to get on board with
Yeah.
all of this and work together to solve this. So active searching for new actives, very important, very timely. It's going to take, I mean, I would hope researchers, I've built a case for why it's going to take a little bit of time, so nobody's going to yell at me and say, Cameron, you told us back in 2022 that you found some active ingredient that worked. Now, why don't we have a product yet? It's going to
It,
take a little
it
bit of
takes
time.
a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. I heard someone from the research community say that it'd take a couple $1 million to probably test a product out appropriately and start beginning to get the process just to get it on the shelves. A few $1 million. So I'll let you know when I get those few $1 million, Cameron, and then we'll talk.
Sounds
Um,
good. I'll let you
don't
know when I get those $1 million too, so I can put
Yeah,
it in the stocks.
exactly. Well, you've got 4 daughters and a wife to take care of, so I don't expect those millions to be happening for you anytime soon. Um, yeah,
Well, though that money, research money, doesn't come to me anyways, just so everybody
yeah,
knows.
that's
Doesn't matter
true.
how much if I write a grant, I don't write myself into the grant because I'm employed by the University of Florida. So I'm just putting that out there so nobody's like, if later on you see that Cameron Jack partnered with some chemical company, people are always like, well, now that he's in the researchers or he's in the company's pockets getting paid. I'm like, I wish. Nobody's paying me anything. Like,
Yeah,
I don't wish. I don't want to. That was a joke. But it's, there's no incentive for me to do anything nefarious if I'm not getting the money for it, right? I'm just trying to help. That's what I'm trying to say.
oh, we hope so. Uh, you know, it's all good, and I think again things are starting to shift and change a little bit, and I think that's for the better. I'm going to plug my Hive Life conference for just a little bit. We have such a large group of great individuals and beekeepers and companies that come, and just a lot of excitement and a lot of innovation, a lot of inspiration as well, and also just the communication. And we have beekeepers from all across the United States, and we had some from Canada this year and other places, and more coming out for the next year. I've got a lot of people. As long as things are opened up, we should have some European fellas and gals. So we're just going to bring a whole new kind of take on things, and it's not that you know there's other things to do in beekeeping that's fun too. It's not like we're the only one that can give that to you, but it is exciting to see. And these people are very passionate. So we're going to kind of get on board with what you're doing. And hopefully all together we can make those changes, because the mites, the viruses, all of those things, they are constantly micro evolving to become more stronger than they were the day before. Natural things that happen, and they're being conditioned to be selected to be stronger, and they get tougher. And if we look at any type of like the apple trees, for example, I know this is kind of getting off from beekeeping, but the bacteria and the fungus problems the apple trees had back 100, 200 years ago are not were not as tough as they are now. And farmers are spraying more, and over time those organisms just have become stronger, and some of that's due in part to the chemicals that we were spraying on them that would cause them to get a little bit tougher. So what I'm saying is, though, things aren't getting any easier anytime soon as far as pest pressure. If anything, maybe we end up with some hornets from Asia, or we end up with this over here and we get more pressure on our bees. And my argument against treatment free, not that there are some people that are looking into that really hard, but all it takes is for a new virus to come along and get into the varroas, varroa mites, and now we've got a whole new reason why varroa mites are a problem again, because we got a new virus to contend with that they're injecting into our bees. So it's a massively complicated issue, and the more I learn about it, the more I realize I don't know about it, because there are so many men and women who have put the majority of their careers into trying to solve this problem. I'm also a little excited, Cameron. We've got some people focus a little bit on breeding some bees that are a little bit more aggressive towards the mites. It seems, again, kind of there's a lot of missing, and maybe occasionally some hitting. Hard to get some uniform results on that breeding, but again, I think that we're getting somewhere, and the communication is the most important thing on what's working and not. So hopefully, I'm hoping what we see in the future is stuff from your department where we get more clarity on what we can use, maybe some futuristic products that could be on the way. We have some beekeepers over here that are now starting to have a lot more success because they are monitoring their mites. They are using the treatments properly and effectively. And so they're keeping their bees alive, which means more success, more honey, more money, more industry, with more money in the industry, more stuff for you, more stuff for the future in general. And then we also have bee breeders who hopefully can create a bee that helps control the mites, even if it's just to a small percentage, just something that helps out. And if we can bring multiple factors into play, I think we have a good shot at rewriting the situation that we're in. But that's kind of the situation on the opposite end of the spectrum, whereas it's not just varroa, it's also the mite, the viruses. It's also, some people are talking about bacteria maybe even being a part of the equation, that varroa is spreading bacteria that also is carrying virus. Who knows? I don't know. There's so much rumors going around, but the fact of the matter is there's a lot of things right now going against our bees. So as beekeepers, we have to work together to try to spin that narrative around,
right,
and create some positives. So
and
get back.
go ahead. I'll let you.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I was going to mention, I mean, you're talking about all these different factors and possible control methods that kind of need to be integrated together. And I was just going to mention, Jamie Ellis and I just published an article that was, it's called the integrated pest management of varroa. I mean, that's just it's got a longer name, but that's the focus, is integrated pest management of varroa. And what we've done is we've tried it. It was actually an effort over 5 years, which was too long. I mean, it just kept building and building and building, and turned into this massive thing that we probably could have turned into a book. But it's what we did was we kind of walked through each of those levels of control. So like starting with like a base level of prevention, and or even like identifying how to identify varroa versus other things, how to what are the economic treatment thresholds, like how do you calculate that and quantify that, and then how do you, what's the purpose of prevention, and then what are our cultural controls, and cultural controls, that'd be something like is something that changes the environment, like these hygienic bee stocks that you're just mentioning. Or then you got mechanical controls, which is things that physically remove the mites from the colonies. You got biological controls where you're trying to control varroa with another organism. You got chemical controls, and so we kind of walk through that, and I think it's open access. It's just a link that we can share and get out to it. Anybody can read it. And I hope it was very much intended to be a useful resource for the beekeeping community. It's exhaustive. I mean, I tried to cover as much of the honeybee or the varroa research that's been done in the last few decades. So it's kind of a long one, but I hope it's very useful and practical for people. So that might be something to check out.
Where can that be gotten again?
Yeah, so it was published in the Journal of Insect Research, or
Okay.
sorry, Journal of Insect Science. I
Okay.
want to say it right, so you can find it. And if you Googled Journal of Insect Science IPM varroa, you're gonna hit it. I mean, it'll come up. So
Good deal.
And yeah.
So I had a question on like citric acid being a treatment option. That's not really, as far as acids go, that's not near as strong as oxalic acid, is it? As far as
Well, if
or what's your
you
thoughts on that?
if it's again, the dose makes poison. Depending on how concentrated, it could be kind of
Okay.
rough, but generally I mean, it would have to be really really concentrated to probably do a lot. I don't know. I've never seen any research on that. I know of people that have done work with citric acid, but I think I don't know enough about it to probably give a good estimate on how effective that would be.
So oxalic acid vapor or oxalic acid dribble, if you had to choose between the two, what are the pros and cons of one over the other? um, Dribble seems to be a little bit more popular overseas. Vapor seems to be more popular over here. But ultimately we need something that works and dosage. So um, between the dribble and the vapor, what's your thoughts on those two?
Sure. So the both of them take a little bit of time to apply. So we'll just kind of get that factor out of the way. I'd say they both take a few minutes, or if you're doing it correctly, if you're just applying, with a syringe, every dribbling on like 5 milliliters in between the frames, it takes a little bit of time. So, but what I'll say is you'll probably get a decent mite drop with the dribble at the current legal rate of what it's, I mean, as according to the label right now, you'd get a decent mite drop. According to the label right now, with varroa vaporization, you won't. So at this moment, I would say I would do dribble. I mean, that's what is going to be effective. If you Once that label changes for OA vapor, then I'd probably shift the other way and say vapor is probably what I would do, and had more success with. The dribble, both. I mean, oxalic acid can be pretty harsh on the bees, right? So the problem with the dribble, especially if you're mixing it in with like a sugar syrup as kind of that carrier and you're dribbling it on, there's going to be some bees that probably ingest that, and it's not good for bees to ingest oxalic acid, or at least not that concentrated. And so the recommendation there is that you maybe spray some sugar syrup into those colonies beforehand, so they kind of are somewhat engorged already. They've taken up, but that's more work. That's another step. That's so it's difficult, as we kind of said throughout this discussion. Is
Where's the easy
um,
button?
yeah, there's not an easy button right now for oxalic acid.
Well, with really anything, it'd be
Yeah.
nice if you and could say this, and I could say this as well on YouTube. Hey, here's a product. You use it, and as long as you use it the way you're supposed to, it's going to control your mites, and you can just skip on back to the house and
Mhm.
not worry at all about Varroa for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
No, that's not how it works.
There's no
So
silver bullet. Not yet. Probably won't be. I think
probably won't be, but I think things can be made better.
definitely.
I firmly believe that. But maybe I'm an optimist. I would think so. As a beekeeper, you have to be. I think that's part of the qualities you have to have is be a little bit crazy. I'm not willing to give up and be an optimist. So with you've mentioned 4 grams of oxalic acid vapor. Now, if you kind of hinted like with the dribble, the legal dose being 1 gram of vapor versus one a dosage of dribble, you would probably get better control with the dribble right now. But if you were able to have those 4 grams of oxalic acid vapor legalized, does that offer fairly good control with what you've experimented? I know that, and I'll say this again early on, and we are going to have pinned in the top comment below and in the description of this video where you can see links to research that Cameron Jack and Jamie Ellis and that group down there has worked on, and it covers stuff like 4 grams of oxalic acid versus a brood break here, or just a brood break, or this and that. But so I'll have a lot of research pinned down below, and anything else that Cameron gives me, I will put down there. But so if you had access to that 4 grams of oxalic acid vapor, what kind of control differences did you feel like you guys were getting versus like the legal dosage of 1 gram?
Oh, it was a massive difference. So, with multiple, I'll go back to that dose study. With 3 treatments over a week, when we were doing 1 gram, we saw a slight reduction of mites from the start to the beginning, or from the beginning to the end.
Three
We applied
treatments
it
in
3 times, once a week with 1 gram. Hardly any difference. It was, statistically, we didn't see any difference from the controls where we did nothing. And we saw that over multiple experiments where 1 gram basically equals nothing. Now with 4 grams, we saw a massive reduction. We were definitely reducing those mites. And as I mentioned, with the new research that's not published, just something that we've done kind of this winter, where we were doing kind of testing the different times, like the intervals between treatments. And we were doing 4 grams. When we were doing it once every 5 days or once every 7 days, we saw massive reductions, and we could, return our mites to a manageable level. And I think that's important. I think better than something that just goes in and drops mites like crazy. I mean, it's probably better that we're using something that, or we're just trying our best to keep mites at a manageable level instead of letting them get really out of control. And that's where kind of keeping an idea of your mite loads is important. So it definitely, OA 4 grams can work really well. We just need some approval for that, and I'm hopeful that will happen in the future.
And I want to say thanks to Steve Chubb being a supporter yet again, for what we do, and being able to bring on guys like Dr. Cameron Jack, who's killing it with oxalic acid, killing mites, that is. And that kind of leads me into another question about, the legalities of getting some of these things approved. Is there anything that hobby beekeepers, sideliners, professional beekeepers can do to help lobby change, or whether it's signing petitions, donating? What can we really do that actually will make a difference, to help bring about these changes that really would benefit all of us?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I wish I had like a really concrete answer for you to just say you need to do this. Well, I don't know necessarily the best route. I do think, getting pressure on those that decision makers is important, like letting them know that, hey, we've got problems here and we need some help. Probably shortest term, what I think would be best, and I kind of even hesitate to say this, Kami, because I don't want to seem like I'm just here pandering for donations and money, but money talks, right? Like if we threw some money behind this, and I feel like, with research, so the USDA, at least until they're planning on transferring that label for apabioxol for another registrant. But right now, USDA is the legal registrant of oxalic acid use in the United States. And so it's going to go through them, and it kind of be on them. They have to work with the EPA to make any kind of label changes. And what they need is research. They need data. They need to have numbers in front of them that shows that this works, that it's safe, and that takes money. And as I said before, well, I don't know if people are expensive. It's not like money that goes to the researchers. It's the money that goes to support research so that we can, because I'm only one person, and I can't do it when I have so many other responsibilities. I can't be the one that has to go do it. I have to hire people, right? And I have students that work for me. I have other technicians that do a great job and work really hard. But people are expensive. It's right now it's expensive time. It's expensive to fill up our truck or our gas tank right now. And so
we really appreciate that expensive gas too. Let me tell you. It really impacts everything. But you're right. Money talks, and literally, that is why we are able to do this interview. It is why we are able to put on the Hive Life conference. And that is why positive change is being made because money talks. YouTube has grown significantly in its quality of information because beekeepers have found, like myself, that we can do it and afford to teach. It's not that we didn't want to communicate and help beekeepers in the past. A lot of us were already very active. I mean, Bob Benny's on YouTube.
Yeah.
A lot of great beekeepers on YouTube, Ian Stepler. But when you're already working 80 hours a week, you don't want to be spending another 10, 15, 20 hours of your time, or take time away from your bee operation to work on YouTube videos when you're not making anything. And it's not just, trying to just hoard all this money. It's justifying to your spouse, hey, I'm going to work an extra 15 hours doing my bee stuff. And, oh, we've got nothing to show for it, and that's literally what a lot of times it comes down to. And so for the conference, we want the best speakers. And sorry, you haven't been invited, Cameron. But no, actually you are invited. So I know that there's some possible issues with that. We'll discuss that in the future, but at some point you're going to be at the Hive Life conference. So just make a plan of that. It's going to be fun.
I'll be so excited.
Yeah, it'll be a blast. But it's not cheap to fly you up from Florida, all those things. So if you want to be able to support all that stuff, I'm going to be leaving in the description as well, and in the top comment, a way that you can actually donate to the University of Florida. There's several research labs for beekeeping in the United States, but this is my personal opinion. I don't even hardly know Cameron. Maybe if I did, I wouldn't say this. But I think the University of Florida is one of the best research labs for beekeeping we have in the United States, and I say that without any reservation. They put out a lot of really good stuff, and at the end of the day, it's all about production. Good intent is fantastic, but people need results, and beekeepers need help. And I think out of all the labs that are around the country, you guys are definitely in the top handful of producing results. So we do really appreciate that very much. And we are expecting you to produce more results in the future, just FYI. So don't think you can sit back and relax now, Cameron. The pressure's on more than it's ever been.
Well, you can count on it. Like I said, I mean, like I'm a beekeeper too. Like I was beekeeping since I was a kid. Like this is something I did this, I pursued this because of what I'm passionate about. And I love research. I'm a total nerd. Like I get excited when I'm hearing about, physiological or gene regulation and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's like the research that excites me the most is when I can stand in front of a group of beekeepers and I can tell them, use this, not that, use this, do this.
We appreciate that.
This. Like, that's what I enjoy, because I mean, it's kind of what drives, and I'm not, all that basic biology research is so important because it's like the building blocks for everything else. So I'm not taking away from them at all, or like the ones that are focused on basic research, but I enjoy the really applied research where I can come with solutions, and that's that's, so count on it. That's what I plan on doing.
Well, again, I'm serious. Anytime in the future, you let me know if there's anything that we can, even if it's just like, hey, we need beekeepers to understand this concept. We think it'd be good for the beekeeping community, or here's something that's really important. Maybe it's a new treatment idea that you guys say, man, this is literally maybe one of the best treatment options that we've discovered in history, that for Varroa, this is going to work really good. But now we've got the hurdle of getting approval and getting people behind this. So if you need and have something like that, I've got access to a great community of some of the best beekeepers the world has to offer. And, so just let me know as far as that goes. Real quick, you talked about applying these things, and liking to be able to help people, that applied science, be able to actually make impact. So what's one of my favorite videos that is not my most popular? It seems like actually my most popular videos typically aren't the ones that I feel like are the most useful. and usually the ones that go viral, I've never had a viral video, but the videos you see go viral on YouTube are usually the least helpful videos on YouTube. It's usually something you probably shouldn't do. Or, someone got a swarm or something like that. That's neat. But when you start talking oxalic acid or treating bees, that usually doesn't make the viral list at all. So this is a video that I did. I'm going to ask your opinion on it. One of the things that I found the last 4 or 5 years that has really helped our operation, we say these 3 things: great queens, dead mites, good nutrition. And what we do is, let's say it's after the honey flow for us. We're talking mid-June. Bees are big. They're strong coming out of that honey flow. But we need some new queens, because we're going to have some queens that get old and expire. So we make some splits. And what I like to do is pull almost exclusively capped brood into the split and try to get almost all the capped brood out of the original colony. So then it's exposed to treatment really good. Because mites are hiding underneath that capped brood. So that makes the treatment over there a little bit more effective. But then in the split, I've got the majority of the capped brood, and I try not to get a lot of larvae. And I do that so I can drop a queen cell in there, or I can drop a caged queen in there, maybe leave her caged for a little bit. And then I can get a break in the brood, because by the time she comes out and starts laying, and it takes 9 days from the time she lays an egg to where they cap the brood, that by the time her brood's capped, all the brood that I brought in there is going to be emerged, as long as it's all capped brood. And now all the mites are exposed to my treatment, whether that's apivar strips, whether that's oxalic acid vapor. So I get my new great queen, I get my dead mites, and as long as I feed them and give them enough resources when I make them, I get my nutrition. But now, listening to you talk about this oxalic acid vapor, because primarily I've been using oxalic acid during this time, that window of brood break, and doing my own research this year with the experimental yard, and seeing what you've posted. If I did a 1 gram, and this is just spitballing here, I have a complete brood break. I do 1 treatment with oxalic acid vapor, and there's a brood break. What kind of percentage do you suppose I could get on mite drop? Would I kill 50%, 70%? Is there a kind of a rough estimate you could kind of give on what you would think?
Yeah, I could give you a rough estimate. It's going to be low. I would say like 10%. Like it's not going to be very much. And the reason I say that, Cayman, is we, in one of the experiments that maybe you can share, that can pin, is that we had brood breaks, right? We had 21-day brood breaks where we had the queen's cage. We had no brood full, and we did 1 application of oxalic acid. We did 3 applications of oxalic acid with brood break, and we just did not kill mites. 1 gram, I don't know, like 1 gram like doesn't phase them. It's not, it's pretty, I don't know if it's the weak, I think it's just not reaching them effectively at that dose. It's just too low. So I wanted to say, first of all, kudos. I think that's very clever. The way, the system that you described, I mean, you got that natural brood break. It opens things up for you to deliver a treatment and make your splits in a way that you've kind of isolated a lot of the mites to one side, and then you time it right, you got a nice treatment. But I just think even with the 1 gram, like you're just not going to get much.
See, and when I do that, and when beekeepers, of course, in the past have showed trays of, sticky boards of after that 1 gram treatment, per brood box. So it might be 2 grams if you have a double deep or whatever that would be, but you see like hundreds of mites. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, if we're only getting a small percentage, how many darn mites do we have in this hive? And I think that's and I think that's the problem is, as we understand it, we think as a community of beekeepers that with 1 round of treatment, and we see, whoa, there's 300 mites on this bottom board. Obviously I got 90%, because a lot of us consider, if I get a brood break and I can get a good treatment in there, I've killed 90%. That is circulated and permeated beekeeping in just our hobby groups, our bee clubs on Facebook. But the more and more I look into oxalic acid vapor, the more I find that it has some issues. I really value it as a treatment, but I also understand that I've got to be a little bit more thoughtful, and I've got to realize its limitations if I'm going to use it appropriately. And I wonder how many of us use it and go, wow, I just bludgeoned those mites, all 300 of them, and on our bottom board. Now I've done my reduction. I'm good for winter. And yet we haven't even cleared maybe half of them out of there or less. And then our bees don't come out of winter with that big cluster we thought that they would, because those mites are going from one bee to the next, feeding on their fat bodies. And we end up with this little dinky cluster, or maybe no bees coming out of winter because we trusted the treatment. So it's an interesting situation that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I wouldn't trust any treatment just by saying I applied it, I'm good. Like you just gotta check. You gotta know. And I'm not saying you need to check every single hive. I mean, that's impossible. But you need to have a decent sample from like your overall apiary. Get an idea of where they're at, because you won't know if it worked until you're looking. I tell this story sometimes to different bee groups that I go and visit, is that, I have the opposite problem of all beekeepers in the world, where I can't get enough Varroa. Like I need mites for my research, right? And so the joke, everybody's like, well, you
Take
can
them.
come get mine.
Yeah, that's
Like,
right. Take them.
I would if I could, if it was fast. It's hard to do that. So I have to set up colonies and manage them in a special way, so that I'm constantly like being able to pull mites out of them. And
It's
and I'm
tricky.
like, yeah, and I'm propping these colonies up, these poor sick bees up, because I need them to keep producing mites. So but like I have gone and I remember there was one day where I was about to start this big study where I needed a bunch of mites on that one day, and I was looking at a frame, and I was like expecting to see mites everywhere, because at this point there should have been a lot. And I was really discouraged because I didn't see a single mite. And I was like, how can I not find any mites? I must not have any. And I was about to throw in the towel. And I just said, okay, I'm going to take a quick sample and just see. And I took a sample of about 300 bees. I brought it back into the lab, and I got off about almost 90 mites like on those bees. And I didn't see it. And I've got 20/20. I'm not going to brag, but I got some good eyes. And I didn't see any mites. So my point is like, when I'm saying you got to check, you got to look, like I don't just mean with your eyeballs. Like you actually have to do something like an alcohol wash, or to a lesser extent sugar shakes. Like you got to be actually using some good methods to look for mites.
Have you ever tried that CO2 version they have in Europe? And does that seem to compare at all to the alcohol wash on efficacy or anything like that? Which, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if so yes, it'll knock down the mites. It'll knock out your bees, it'll knock out the mites, and you can shake them off. I've never done like a head to head to see how much was left on. The nice thing about the alcohol wash is that like I can physically separate the bees. I could wash them over and over and over until like I am confident that I got every last mite off of their bodies. Um, with the CO2, you're not going to want to do that. You're just like powdered sugar. It's not like you're going to sift through it and look with your hands. But you can be pretty confident that you got almost all the mites off. So I don't mind the CO2. In fact, we do that with research all the time. It's kind of a quick way to drop some mites, and then we let them kind of come to, and then we can collect them and use them for our research.
Huh, interesting. So someone was asking about treatment thresholds, real quick. So at what point, if you were actually a business or something like that, I can give my answer to just on kind of what we do. But he was asking what type of percentage, if you do an alcohol wash, if we see a 2% infestation, which would be 6 mites in an alcohol wash, would it be 3%, 4%? What's the economic threshold for when you think a colony needs to be treated? And I think that varies with the time of the year too.
It's a good question. It definitely varies with the time of the year. I was going to even mention, I haven't brought this up, but the Honeybee Health Coalition has a really good document about Varroa control, and they have some good resources on their website as well. And they have like an economic decision well, like an economic threshold table where they say like, okay, at this time of the year when you're at peak population, you might be able to get away with more, maybe like
Mhm.
5 mites per 100 bees. Certain times of the year it might only be 3. Sometimes of the year it's probably only going to be 1. So I would recommend that viewers go and check that out because it's really helpful.
The
You
Honeybee
know,
Coalition.
Honeybee Health Coalition. Yep.
Honeybee Health Coalition.
And I, I would, we generally, very generally speak and say like 3 mites per 100 bee. Don't let your bees get above 3 mites. I think it depends. If you were going to plan on applying treatments, something effective. So something like say oxalic acid, we've already talked about like, one dose, one application is maybe not going to be very effective. So then you would want to apply that, your treatment, or your economic threshold is going to be lower for that, right? You're going to want to
Mhm.
apply it maybe at 1 mite per 100 bee. And 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 so you kind of have to time. Yeah, that's why just keeping an eye on your mites can help you time some of this, time your treatments, and think about what you would want to apply and when. So the short answer to this person who asked a great question is it depends. And I mean that I always hate giving that answer, but the way it is,
Well,
like it depends.
from my standpoint of a beekeeping business, of course mites make or break us, and I'm not, I agree with everything that you said, but as far as like numbers, I need my bees to go into winter with 1% or less infestation. And we're not talking, we do an alcohol wash in August or early September and we get, oh, okay, we're only at 1% then because our bees are brooding up really good in September and then October. And if they're Italians, they're brooding up in November for sure. And probably some in December as well. And so by the time they actually shut down, we could literally be talking, now we're at a 3-4% maybe infestation, whatever that is. And it doesn't mean that our hives always die, but that we're not going to get ripped champs coming out in February that are 8-10 frame clusters that are so big that we're going to have to pull bees back away from them to keep them from swarming in March. So from my standpoint, it's a little bit different because, yeah, if we look at the colonies coming out of the honey flow, and if I do an alcohol wash in June, the bees are really healthy. They've had so much nutrition coming out of all the hardwoods and everything producing this diverse pollens. And I think this is where the variables really come into play for me is in the springtime, we have massive amounts of nutrition and bees live longer. They're healthier, they're more resilient. And so if I have a 4% infestation at this point and I get those mites under control quickly, my bees still look pretty darn good.
Mhm.
If I get it. But if I had a 4% infestation in September and I'm starting to work towards building a population for winter bees and our fall flow is very inconsistent, some years it's pretty okay. And some years like this year, we had cooler weather and rain. We almost had no goldenrod, nothing. And when you have nutritional stress compounded with varroa stress, 4% could be more damaging than it would have if it was in a time of the year where you had a big population of bees that had a really good nutritional upbringing. So when in doubt, nuke them out is what we say. Keep them low. 4% is really high. I don't like to see 4%. 2% is okay, but how quickly, rough estimate, would a 2% infestation typically turn into a 3 to 4% infestation, you would think?
Yeah, this is really cool. There's some researchers in the UK that measured doubling rates. I mean, so how long it took to double, and they observed like they within about 5 weeks they were getting doubling kind of early on, but then it's like that exponential growth curve, right? So it kind of started off slow and then bam, it's going to shoot up. So if you're at 2 mites per 100 bees, it's probably just going to be one single brood cycle, then bam, you're just overrun with tons of mites. And so that's why you got to try to keep them low within that, ideally 0, but it's never going to be fully 0, but you're like in that low zeros to 3 range. You got to keep them within there, or else they just shoot up and it just gets out of control. So I don't know the exact answer of how long everything takes, like in terms of doubling, but think of that exponential growth curve, or I guess technically they say it's a geometric curve that they're gonna shoot up real quick.
It's yeah, I mean, just keeping them low. I can definitely, you look at the bees, and if you've been into them for a long time, and this is something new beekeepers will pick up on over time, but talking to beekeepers, when I first got into bees, and now I see it all the time myself, because when you can compare a lot of colonies, when you have two hives, you've only got a year or two of experience, it's hard to compare things. But when you've dealt with hundreds and thousands of hives over the years, you can see a big difference in the bees' behavior and just how healthy the bees look. The cappings look healthy in the colony. The bees themselves look shiny and fresh, and they just look more vigorous when the mite levels are lower. You don't see these impacts in the early on stages of when they're making the transition from not really being too much of a problem to getting to the point of becoming a problem. That in between area, a lot of times you don't see that transition, but once they get to that, they're starting to become a problem. The general look of the colony starts to diminish, and you start, they don't want to take feed at the same rate. Not percentage wise, they're just not as efficient. I had a question for you that actually was asked earlier and was asked again. What is the best treatment? Thanks, Steve Chubb, for donating again. And so what's the best treatment in your opinion? This is the $1 million question. Don't screw this one up, Cameron. I know you've got an answer that's going to solve all of our problems right here. But between all the legal stuff that we have access to, if you were running a professional operation, running it totally legal, what are you thinking that you're going to be using in your arsenal?
So this is the one that you're just setting me up for. This is that it depends. I hate saying that, but it's what it's gonna be is it's probably, as I mentioned, there are different efficacies, so you're going to get different rates of effective mite killing at different seasons. So when we did this experiment, let's just take Apivar for instance. We had like a good drop in the fall. We didn't see as good drop in the spring. We did see it work well at certain times of the year. We don't see it work at the same. And that's just Florida, and that's just north central Florida, right? Like it's just going to very much depend on what you do. So I can tell you what I do. We often will use something like Formic or Apiguard in the early spring when we've got the temperature ranges right where we want them, and we get an okay control out of that. Then very often, when we get into the early or the late summer, maybe once we've pulled our supers that we're going to do, then we're using Apivar. We're getting a decent drop, not great as good as we used to, but we get some drop. And then once we kind of are getting into the cooler weather, we're using multiple applications of oxalic acid. But and that depends. It kind of depends on our mite loads, and the bulk of the research colonies that we manage are that they're for research, and so sometimes we need different mite levels and things. So what I'm saying as a system for us is not necessarily going to be applicable for you in Tennessee or for somebody in California or somebody in Texas.
And it's complicated because some of the natural treatments, like I like Apiguard, but it's a little rough on the smaller colonies. And so is formic acid, and especially if you don't use it in the treatment threshold, then it could be really rough if it off gases really fast. Mm-hmm. And then we're talking here, Apivar is not giving us quite what we used to see in the past, and that's extremely frustrating because a lot of people relied on that treatment. Bob being one of them, myself, I relied on that, and I appreciate you mentioning using multiple treatments throughout the years because I'm kind of like you. When I go talk and Bob's there, Bob always gets to talk about honey production. He talks about raising queens, and I always get the revelations of the Bible. I get the treating for mites. I get you've got to, do this over here for we kill queens if there's a European foul brood, and people are like, oh, you're such a barbarian, Cayman. It's terrible beekeeper. But I like to talk about those really because those were the things that when I started taking them seriously really impacted our business the most. And of course, Bob does talk on those too. Of all people, I shouldn't pick on Bob. He's really too kind of a guy to
He's
do that.
the nicest person in the entire world. If you had to ask me who it was, I'd probably say Bob.
Yeah, it probably would be. I mean, he's like a big teddy bear. So, but when it comes to beekeeping, that's what I love about Bob. I sit down and talk to him about his plans for next year, and he's always just excited about learning more and doing more. And he does not have that old person mentality of set in his ways. He's such a learner and always willing to explore new avenues. So yeah, Bob's a great guy. But getting back to kind of the point, I focus and I end up talking a lot on these topics about mite control because they're so important and they impact us at every level of our bee operation with these mites. But with the thiamol and all of these treatments, we're kind of in a rough spot. There's no clear cut way of doing any of these things. But I get up there and I say, hey, since we don't really get 90% kill with any treatment, like almost, I mean, it happens, but it doesn't happen very often. Right. And especially if you're running 300 colonies and treating all of those, to expect 90% treatment kill across the board every time it's a good way to lose your shirt. If you trust that without verifying that with an alcohol wash. So I get up there and say, we treat twice in December. We treat after we pull honey supers in June. And then it's usually necessary after alcohol wash checks to treat again in late summer. And people are like, Cayman, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of time. But you know what? Is it a lot of money? Paying $185, $200 for a nucleus colony every year.
Exactly.
And not getting a honey crop off of it for a full another season. Because, and maybe in some areas you can get honey the first year, but here in Tennessee, you typically cannot. In most places you can't in the first year. So it's complicated. So getting back to that question, on treatments, there's so many variables, but I really think that alcohol wash, as much as people hate to use it, really kind of helps show you what is going on. And where you're at in that colony. And you might treat 10 colonies and get one with 0% mites, no mites in the alcohol wash. And that one next door might have 8 still in the alcohol wash. And it's really
that's why you kind of have to average it out over your apiary and come up with a treatment plan kind of large. I mean, I would love to say if you're a backyard beekeeper and you just have a few colonies in your backyard, go ahead and check them all. And that would be great. If you're dealing with multiple apiaries and you got a lot of bees, you just can't do that. But giving yourself an idea of where your bees are at is going to be real important. Just like you're saying.
One more question from the crowd. Cameron, what devices do you use for oxalic acid testing? This is actually from Laura Bees. They make an oxalic acid vaporizer. They were a vendor at our conference. Cool. And he has sold thousands of vaporizing units. And I have one. I think they're made really good. And he has good customer service. I'm not trying to plug him here, but I did tell him if he ever started doing bad customer service, we'd do a video on his poor customer service. So now Rob's a good guy. I mean, he's one of the reasons I get excited about the future of beekeeping, because there's a lot of young men and women that I see getting involved. And so they are trying to create things and not always being successful the first time, but they're at least trying. Somebody's being creative, and he's wanting to know oxalic acid testing. He says he'd like to be involved in helping anything that you guys are doing in the future. But what is a way, I guess, that you test oxalic acid, making sure that it's clean or pure or whatever? Is there anything you can kind of shed some light on that? I'm kind of lost. This is out of my league here.
Well, that's a great, and I appreciate, the question and the willingness to potentially help with some future projects. We use vaporize when I need to write a paper. And I mean, I can't do research just for the fun of doing research. Like, I have to publish, and I'm in a university system where if you don't publish, you're going to lose your job, right? Like, this is is an important part of it. And when we publish and we got to report to the scientific community, I have to be able to defend every aspect of every study, right? And so when I'm so for the research that we're doing, we're for projects, we're probably primarily using a, a, a vaporizer that we can point to and we can point others to. So like, I mean, there's probably dozens of companies that manufacture or
Sure.
make some of these vaporizers. But for instance, like Oxavape is a big one that I know of and I've worked with. I mean, we've purchased some of their equipment. So like when I'm using that, I'm going to specifically say give the information. So it's something that others can use. And for research, that's really important because research has to be reproducible or else what's the point, so it needs to be reproducible. So I mean, while we have lots of great beekeepers that have like sent us devices and we use them. I mean, I don't want to make it like sound like we don't. We do. We have lots of people applying treatments. We can use it. Oftentimes with experiments, I have to have some company that I can point back to so that some researcher in the other side of the world, and let's say in Australia, like they could potentially order that same device and reproduce the experiment just like how we did. So that's the point. I mean, while there's lots of people making good equipment, and I will say there's, on one hand, there's people making great equipment. There's probably people making some poorly made equipment that doesn't regulate temperature in any way and can maybe even be a hazard to the beekeeper or to their colonies. So I won't go there specifically. I'm just
Sure.
say that, be smart and make sure it works well.
Well, and one last question. I've kept you longer than I meant to, and all of that. What we've kind of brushed over this a little bit. And towards the end, again, I want to say thanks everyone for watching. Thanks everyone for the donations to our channel so that we can keep doing this, because that is how we're able to keep doing this. I'm going to be leaving the donation link in the top comment with a lot of Dr. Cameron's research and other research that they have. I've read it, at least most of it so far. There's just a lot of good information there, and you can see for yourself what they have found on oxalic acid research, and that will be pinned in the top comment and the description of this video. And you can, like I said, donate as well to the University of Florida for them to continue. As we let you go, what are some things that you're looking forward to, Cameron, whether it's oxalic acid research or maybe a different chemical control, or maybe something that's not even controlling Varroa? What's some things you're looking forward to in the future of your career or in beekeeping in general?
So we kind of touched on this earlier in our conversation, but really, as we both kind of agreed that, beekeepers, researchers, industry, the government, like we have to come together on this. And if I could if I could leave anybody with some hope, I feel like we're doing that. Like I feel like in the last 5-6 years, I'm starting to see that shift. And I see more trust, and I see, more collaboration, and that's probably what excites me the most, and something that I hope like throughout my career that just continues to build and grows as that, so that we can work together to solve these problems. As far as any kind of treatment, I think there's going to be so much work that's going to be done. There's new exciting possibilities with RNAi technologies that could potentially happen. There's new exciting treatments that may come down the pike, and we'll discover some new chemicals. There's exciting developments with breeding efforts. And there's exciting developments with nutrition and queens. There's so much work that's being done. It is exciting to me. But ultimately, that's all for naught if we're not coming together, right?
Exactly. And let me ask you, how old are you, Cameron?
I'm 34.
30,
How old are you, Kay?
I'm 33. I thought you were about my age.
You're about the same.
So, well, and that's why it's so important for this networking, honestly, is because, hopefully we both if our wives don't take us out, we'll live to be 70 or 80 years old. My wife says, as long as I'm useful, she'll keep me around past that age. So it's like that's a problem when your wife's a beekeeper. She knows about kicking out the drones and everything. And
Sure.
so, but seriously, we could be, helping one another, and randomly over time, we're in the same age group, and one of these days we're going to be the old guys, hopefully, in beekeeping. And so the collaboration that we do is important, and I want to see change. It's really exciting on my end, to get to experience a lot of beekeepers who send me emails who are having success for the first times, not because of some new principle that we created, but we're just trying to show, hey, beekeeping, you can do it. Anybody can become a beekeeper, but you've got to work for it. You got to understand what's going on. You got to understand that some things don't always work the same for you as they do. It's work. It's not like unlike anything else in life. If you want to get good at any job, anything, you got to put a little bit of thought into it and a little bit of work, and you got to stick with it. And part of the making mistakes and failure is part of the process of being successful and achieving something. I firmly believe that. So, well, I figured you were fairly young. So, 34, I mean, you're in the prime of your life, baby. I mean, that's a great age. I mean,
My back hurts pretty bad. I turned 30, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh man.
That's it's because you sit in a chair all the time. That must be what it is.
Well, beekeepers are also notorious for having some back issues. So
that is true. Well, tell your wife I said, thanks for letting us keep you on longer, and thanks for taking all these questions and being long suffering. I totally plan to have you on sometime in the future, and also to have you at a Hive Life conference in the future. So if we can make that work, it's gonna happen. So just plan on it, man.
All right. I'd love it. And I appreciate you having me on today. And I'd be happy to come back and talk about more research in the future.
All right. Maybe something not so gloom and doom as
mites. Exactly. We'll talk about the fun stuff that I never get to talk about.
Yeah. Who's that Jamie Ellis guy anyway? All right, buddy. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks.